Hi, I'm your host, Nia, and today we are talking all things tea. And to do that, I am joined by Melissa Salazar, who is a tea sommelier. So she is more than qualified to lead this discussion. Melissa, would you like to start us off by telling us how you became interested in tea, and so much so that you became a tea sommelier?
Yeah, absolutely. So I originally started having tea time with my grandmother, which was super special. I am one of 8 children, so that one-on-one quality time was really what made tea so special and so important to me. I then, I grew up, I got my degree in exercise, nutrition, and wellness. And I did my undergrad study on the ergogenic effects of green tea. And I realized, wow, it has so many health benefits and it's so amazing. And I just decided, you know what, I want to do something in tea. So I found the International Tea Masters Association and became certified first as a tea sommelier, then as a certified tea master, and then as a blend specialist. So now I create all my own teas. I help teach the courses, and I absolutely love talking tea. So thank you so much for having me on.
Amazing. So you were not only a tea sommelier, but also a tea master. Could you differentiate the two?
Yeah, so the two, it's different schooling, it's different programs. The Tea Sommelier course helps you to become kind of like a professional taster, very similar to like a tea sommelier that you would, find in the wine. But with the Tea Master Certificate, you basically delve a little bit deeper. You start to really distinguish and differentiate between differences in nuances of taste. So let's say that you have 2 different jasmine teas. One is, a $30 jasmine tea. One's like a $200 jasmine tea. And being able to distinguish and comparatively distinguish the difference between those two. And then that's kind of how that unfolds. And then, of course, you have a lot more coursework. You have a lot bigger exams and things like that.
Gotcha. So are these coursework and exams in person, or are they virtual, or do they become virtual because of COVID?
Yeah, so they were primarily in person. Since COVID has happened, we have now put a lot of the education online. So most of my tea courses now, blending course and my tea sommelier course that I teach is all online. And virtually what we do is we send out the teas, we taste them with the students, we go over all the different nuances of flavors and things like that. And then with the blending course, they are sent out packages of all the blending materials and we blend together as a group. And then the second half of the course is online, which it's always been online, the second portion of the class.
Yeah. So what are the exams like? Are they kind of like blind taste tests and then you have to write about what the flavor profile is, or is it more like the science behind it or like the history behind tea?
So you have different aspects of the final exams. And one aspect, let's say, if we're talking about tea sommelier course, you have the dissertation where you take a tea topic, you dissect it, you do the research, and then you write, a 10-page paper on basically that entity of tea. Then you have a final exam, which consists of about 110 questions. True or false explanations, essay questions, and things like that. You also have the tea blend that you have to create based on flavor profile and all of that. And then you also have the mystery tea, which is kind of what you said, tasting a tea, giving the flavor profile, examining from a point of flavor, taste, aroma, and trying to figure out what type of tea it is, but not only that, the specific tea that it is. So that one's very difficult. I think most people end up getting it wrong, but what we're looking for in that one is more the process that our students go to in order to figure that out, rather than getting that particular type of tea correct, because there are over 10,000 different varietals of tea. So it's not as easy as one might think.
Right. Yeah, that none of that sounds very easy at all. So you've been through all of those and you have all your certificates for that. And then you started your own tea company. So what made you take the leap to actually start your own company and start selling your own teas?
So as I was going through the courses, I decided, I've always been really into fitness. And, I originally, like I said, got my degree in exercise nutrition and wellness. And I wanted to create my own blends so that I could kind of specify for people who are in the fitness industry. I did a lot of, fitness competitions and things like that. And so what I wanted to do was create a line of teas that were fitness focused, but also tasted like dessert, because if you've ever competed in a fitness competition, that's something that you miss. You miss the dessert, the chocolate flavors, the, sweets and things like that. And I'm a foodie at heart. So for me, it was like, if I could create something that is so good for you, helps enhance your performance, but also tastes like dessert, I'm all for it. So once I went through the program, as I was going through the blending course, I was like, you know what? I want to make a line of dessert teas specifically for fitness-minded individuals or people who just wanted to stay healthy, wanted to drink something that tastes like dessert without having to splurge on calories and things like that.
Yeah, definitely. Could you kind of walk us through the process of tea production, I suppose, like creating flavor profiles, and even before that, drawing inspiration? You said you really like the sweet teas, but there's so many different like sweet flavors. So how do you know like what goes with what? And then do you like go get the tea leaves yourself and then kind of like mix and match, play with them? And how does this whole thing work?
Yeah, it's a process. So so basically what I like to tell people, and especially people who are taking my blending course, is the number one thing that you have to get first is the base of the tea. The base of the tea is like your canvas. And the more knowledge, the more experience you have with bases of tea. So for instance, I could say, okay, my base of tea is going to be a black tea, right? What's the flavor profile of that black tea? Well, depends on what type of black tea we're talking about. I could choose a Kimun from China, which would give it kind of smoky, earthy type notes, or I could choose a Yunming Yunnan from China, which gives it more berry currant type notes. So depending on what I'm trying to create will definitely determine what type of base that I'm going to choose. How I usually come up with my blends, and it's so funny that you asked this, is I'm typically on a run. And, I run every morning and I'm thinking about ideas and things go through my mind. This is when I'm kind of in my like flow state, almost like a meditative type state where I'm thinking of, wow, I would really love to create X. So let's say that it's my s'mores tea blend, right? I really want to create this s'mores tea blend. Then my mind starts going like, okay, what type of flavor profiles do I need for that tea blend, right? So of course, the first thing that comes to mind is smokiness, toasty, chocolate, marshmallow, all these different flavor profiles. So what I like to do as a blender is I like to try and create the most natural type of blend that I can, while still lending all of those really exceptional nuances of flavor. So I'll go to, okay, what flavor profile do I need? I definitely need a thick tea, a tea that has enough mouthfeel and thickness in its base so that if people want to add cream to it, they can. It's going to be thick enough that it seems rich when I add the chocolate to it. But I also need something that's smoky. I also need something that's a little bit toasty, kind of like gives it that graham cracker type taste. So what I did was I started with a Kenyan black tea, which would give it kind of that smooth, really nice texture. But then I needed to blend that with the lapsang souchong, which is predominantly smoky. Now, if I used lapsang souchong by itself, it would be extremely smoky. So you would get almost like too much smokiness. So definitely everything's done with percentages. I typically, if a tea base is extremely strong, I typically start out with a 10% additive. Basically, I go with 10% and then the rest of the other ingredients. So this particular blend that I created, the s'mores tea blend, is a little bit complex because I add, I think, 5 different bases to combine that flavor profile that I'm looking for, which would be the hojicha, which is very toasty and nutty. That's the graham cracker. And then we have the Kenyan black, which is really smooth and delicious. We have the lapsang souchong, which is going to give it that kind of earthy, toasty, smoky taste to it, kind of like your toasted marshmallow taste. And then I also added in some honey bush for honey notes, kind of like the graham cracker honey type taste. And then I decided later on that I needed some pu'er in it. So pu'er is an aged tea. It's very thick mouthfeel. It goes really well with cream and other things. And it added that thickness that I needed to the liqueur that I was looking for. So it really is kind of a complex process. And then, of course, after you get your bases correct and you get all the percentages right, and it is trial by error for sure. Like, you have to go through the process. You have to taste it. And it can get very arduous if you're a perfectionist. Luckily, I'm not a super perfectionist, but you try different renditions. You know, if I changed my Kenya Black to an Assam, it would completely change the blend. So it really, having a knowledge in the base of teas helps like exponentially, because you're able to have a lot less trial by error, knowing and being strong in what the tea is going to taste like, what type of flavors it's going to lend. And then, of course, you do your flavoring, right? Which is, you could use natural flavors, and you would basically spray the leaves with the flavors and then add in any type of other herbs or things that you wanted. So in this particular case, I added in some dried marshmallows, like those freeze-dried marshmallows, which are really cool because they actually melt in the tea. And so you get a real marshmallow type taste from it. And of course, I put chocolate flavoring. So with all of that combined with the smoky kind of tea taste, it really does. I mean, I feel it really tastes like a s'mores.
Wow, yeah, I want to try that now. Oh my gosh. So do you have all these different base tea leaves just on hand, like in your supply store in your house, or do you have to like go out and get the leaves yourself? Like, how does that work?
So yeah, production of tea I leave to the experts. And you know, in most other countries, tea masters are the people who produce the tea and finish the roasting and all of that. And so I do get all of my teas from different sources and places in the world that I visited. Like, for instance, I have Nakane Tea Company that I go through for all of my Japanese type teas. I've been to his farms and I've been to his factory, and they're amazing. So yeah, I have different people that I know around the world that produce tea professionally, and I basically source from those, and then I add herbs and other flowers and flavors from other companies as well. So my cabinets in my house are filled with tea and herbs and spices and all the above. I am an in-home blender, so I have what's called a Cottage Food Law Act permit. And what that does is it just allows me to blend all of my blends handcrafted from home. And so it takes up like the majority of my kitchen, and it's a lot of fun, but it does take up a lot of space because each batch is in about a 2-pound quantity. So you need at least 4 kg of the teas, plus you need another 2 pounds of each type of herb or spice that you're going to be using in order to blend it. And then the finished product I usually have on hand at about 2-pound quantities, so that my tea stays nice and fresh. And by the time, you know, it runs out, I'm ready to make a new batch.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of tea. I'm sure your house smells amazing though.
It is. It's pretty awesome.
So do all these base tea leaves that you were mentioning, do they all come from the same plant, or do they all have like their own, do they come from separate plants, or how does that work?
Okay, so yeah, let's get really basic. Tea all comes from Camellia sinensis. So if it doesn't come from Camellia sinensis, it does not come from the tea plant. There are different varietals like Camellia assamica, Camellia sinensis, which is the Chinese varietal. Camellia assamica is the Indian varietal, but it's all the same plant. And then the way that it's produced after that will determine what type of tea it is. So for instance, with white tea, it's sun withered and dried, which makes it a white tea. With green tea, it goes a little step further, and they either steam it or they roast it or they pan fire it. This makes sure that there's no oxidation present, but it does go through that extra step. So Japanese teas are primarily steamed, And then, Chinese teas are either roasted or pan-fired for, extra flavor and different flavor profiles. And then when you allow the tea to oxidize, right, you would roll it and bruise it and expose it to oxygen. That causes the oxygenation process, what people call fermentation, but it's not really a true fermentation, it's just oxidation. That's going to give you your oolongs, black teas, and so forth. So oolong teas are partially oxidized, with anywhere from 15 to 80% oxidized, and then black teas are fully oxidized. So just like when you expose an apple to oxygen, it turns brown. Same thing happens with the tea leaves. It changes the color, the biochemical structure of the tea, and now you've got a full-fledged black tea. And the flavor profile has changed. Everything about it has changed. And then you can go a step further and create pu'er. Pu'er is an aged tea who actually goes through the fermentation process. So they oxidize it fully, and then they ferment it, right? They expose it to moisture and heat, and then they let it age, just like with wine. So it has probiotic type properties to it. So that's also a different type of tea benefit. But when we're talking about like herbal tisanes like hibiscus and chamomile and lavender, those are all their own type of plants. Those aren't really considered a tea, even though everybody calls it, chamomile tea, but it's actually not a tea, it's a tisane. And it's just infused in water. So they, especially Americans call it tea, but it's not really tea.
Oh, wow. Okay. So 2 questions to follow up.
Yeah.
So if these different base teas are differentiated by these like different processes, is that why these different teas have to be like brewed with water at different temperatures? And is that how they differentiate between caffeinated and non-caffeinated teas?
So yeah, so caffeine of tea has been a little bit confusing up to this point, but fully oxygenated teas are higher in caffeine. And just like I said, like it changes the biochemical structure and everything about the tea. Definitely it changes the caffeine content. With that said, because white tea, even though it's only sun withered and dried, comes from young tea leaves, and the tea plant itself has a lot of caffeine to begin with, it does end up having more caffeine than one would think, even though it doesn't go through that oxidation process. The other thing is when it comes to matcha, matcha is a green tea that's been crushed into a powder. So you're actually ingesting the entire leaf. That also has a lot of caffeine compared to just brewing a regular green tea. And even though it didn't go through the full oxidation process, it does have a lot of caffeine just because you're eating the whole plant and you're eating all the leaves.
Gotcha. So why is it so important that these teas need to be brewed at different temperatures? Like what happens if, like I'm pretty sure with black teas, you want to use like boiling temperature, and then for like green teas, you don't want to be quite as hot. So like what happens if, you put boiling hot water with green teas? Is that super bad for it, or?
Yes. So definitely as the biochemical structure changes, white teas, which is so interesting because white teas can have a higher temperature, generally around 180 to 195, and green teas much, much lower. And I think it's because with the white tea, they're younger leaves, they can handle a little bit higher temperature. They can steep for longer periods of time without becoming bitter. With the green leaves, they are so delicate and they really need a lower temperature, anywhere from 150 to usually 175. And part of that is the way that they are structured too. Like white teas, a lot of people, it's 2 leaves and a bud primarily for like a white peony, right? Well, the buds can handle higher and longer steeping times, and it gives you more of a floral type taste. With the green leaves, they're just very delicate and thin, and usually don't do well with good heat, and they can only be steeped for a short amount of time. Otherwise, they become bitter. So with the black tea, because it's oxidized, it allows it a little bit more steeping time, has more tannins. And so the longer you steep it, it can become bitter, but it can handle longer steeping times than, say, a green tea. With the oolong, because they are rolled and they have gone through different processes, usually roasting and other extra processes, they can handle also a little bit higher temperatures, around 180 to 195. And, part of that is due to the fact that they are rolled so tight, and it takes a little bit more heat and a little bit more energy for them to fully open up and expand. And so they can handle a little bit longer or shorter steeping times, depending on how you like to brew your tea. Standard wise, we usually use about 2 to 3 minutes for an oolong. Chinese version would be 20 seconds, but you would use more leaves, less water. So there are different ways of doing it, and it is absolutely subjective. But in general, yes, there are different steeping times and different temperatures for each type of tea. That's going to be beneficial for flavor, not making it taste bitter and things like that.
Oh, wow. As you mentioned, you have a background in exercise, nutrition, and wellness, which is super interesting. So I'd love to hear you talk more about how tea intersects with health. And I don't know if you've studied specifically like tea's maybe physiological effects on the body, or if you could speak to that, but that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I love this too. That's why I told you I was so excited to talk with you. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. The health benefits of tea are absolutely exponential. And, depending on what type of tea will determine what type of health benefits you're actually going to get from the tea. A lot of people say, well, what's the healthiest tea? And I kind of laugh at that question, because it's like, well, what type of health benefits are you looking for? Because depending on what type of tea will determine what health benefits you're actually going to get more of. And it's quite surprising, actually. Like with black tea, most doctors would say, oh, you can't have, if you're a heart patient and you have high blood pressure, you can't have black teas. But black tea works very different in the body than, say, like a coffee does, right? So physiologically, it actually dilates the veins and actually decreases blood pressure. But because it's associated with a caffeinated beverage, they categorize it as the same thing as they would with coffee. Also, another myth that a lot of people talk about is the fact that they think that tea is a diuretic, but it absolutely is not. It has the same urination rates as water, and it's extremely hydrating. It's not like coffee in that it's way less acidic, and it is not a diuretic. So you can absolutely drink tea all day long and still stay hydrated. Also, what's the most interesting thing and what sets tea apart from any other plant is the L-theanine. So L-theanine is a non-protein amino acid that actually helps decrease anxiety, increase focus, increase GABA in the brain, which helps with anxiety, helps with stress, all of those things. So there's only one other plant, and it's a type of mushroom that carries L-theanine, but nothing in the world carries the amount of L-theanine that tea does. And that's what makes this plant so special. And, set apart from some people only drink tisanes or herbal teas. When you're drinking a tisane or an herbal tea, you're not going to get the L-theanine, because it is literally only in the Camellia sinensis plant. And the higher the quality of loose leaf tea that you get, the higher amount of L-theanine you're going to get from the plant. And it's just so beneficial for your brain, for your anxiety, stress levels, relaxation. I mean, this is why Buddhist monks have been drinking tea for centuries, because, it not only increases the focus, but it relaxes you. So for me, this was extremely important when I came to tea, because I never quite understood as a young girl why I would get that kind of euphoric, almost like tea drunk type feeling, and I would feel relaxed because I was an ADHD type kid. And with tea, it's like my wine. It relaxes me. It helps me feel centered. It makes me feel euphoric. So, obviously the type of tea and the quality of tea is hugely important when we're talking about L-theanine and its benefits. But every type of tea has L-theanine. Different teas have a higher quantity. There are GABA oolongs that have, higher quantity of L-theanine. Matcha has a very high content of L-theanine. Green teas tend to have a pretty high content of L-theanine. Black teas also have L-theanine. So it is a very, very important aspect of wellness. And I think that's why it's typically grouped together with yoga groups and breathing and all of that, because it all kind of goes together. And it's a pretty special and amazing plant. I mean, besides all the amazing health benefits of how it works in your body, even though it has caffeine, it still helps you to relax and focus. Whereas coffee confuses the brains, can cause jitters and other types of things from happening. But it's pretty amazing. And for people who are caffeine sensitive, I always say try blends, because blends will still have the L-theanine from the tea, but it'll also be blended with some tisanes that don't have caffeine.
Gotcha. Is there a way to brew a cup of tea so that you kind of like optimize that L-theanine, or like, is there, if you boil it at too hot of temperatures, will that destroy the compound?
So typically I like to even instruct my students not to completely boil, because you are working with a plant. And anytime you're working with a plant, whether it's a vegetable or, any type of other entity, you don't really want to boil it at too high of temperatures, because you start to denature that plant. Mm-hmm. And then you start to lose nutrients as it gets hotter and hotter. So what I like to tell them is, I don't typically go over about 195, even for my black teas, just so that you keep everything kind of intact. The L-theanine, it won't really compromise the L-theanine. I don't think I've seen any studies done about temperatures and L-theanine, but I do know that the higher quality the leaves and the higher quality the tea, the more L-theanine you're going to get.
Sounds good. All right. Well, to wrap things up, I've got to know, in your opinion, how do you brew the perfect cup of tea?
The perfect cup of tea. Awesome. So, like I said before, it is definitely subjective. Knowing the base of tea is going to be super important, and going from there. So for me, that's a really tough question, because, well, first of all, the main thing you want to think about is you don't want anything hindering the tea leaves. So in that, I mean no tea bags, because the membrane of the tea bag will capture some of those really, really small nutrients that you want for your body. They'll be stuck in the tea bag. So you definitely don't want that. You want to give leaves room to expand and open. You also want to make sure you have the right temperature. You also want to make sure that you have high quality water. Water is extremely important. Most people think, oh, I'll just use tap water, or I'll just use hot water from the faucet. This is like a really bad idea. Tap water, typically has chlorine and things like that in it. It sometimes has other types of elements, and it doesn't have a very good mineral balance. The best water to use is spring water. If you can get spring water, awesome. If you get bottled spring water, awesome, because it has the right elements, the right mineral content, and it's going to give you a much better tasting tea. Distilled water makes tea kind of flat, so that's not a good one to use. So having the right water, having the right temperature for the particular type of tea, and also having a vessel to brew your tea that is not going to hinder the tea leaves is paramount. I love to use the tea press. So most people see them as like a coffee press. You push it down. What I love about it is, you don't want to push it down all the way so that you crush the leaves, but you just want to give it space, and you want to give it movement. You can do the same thing in a gaiwan. Are you familiar with a gaiwan?
I am not. What is that?
So a gaiwan is it looks like a Chinese cup vessel with a lid on top. And basically what they typically do is they move the water with the lid to kind of give the leaves movement, but they're not hindered by anything. So when you pour the tea out, you kind of prop the lid this way so that the water can come out, but the leaves stay in. And this allows for the tea to give you everything that it has. It's not hindered. It's not being screened by anything. It's absolutely wonderful. And you'll get the full flavor and texture of the tea.
Oh, wow. What about, oh gosh, I don't know what they're called, but they're little mugs. And then on top you have like the little cup to hold the tea leaves. Is that still like hindering leaves?
Those two. Oh, absolutely. So you can use those too. Like I have like this little pitcher here. This is great for really big. Oh, I don't have the infuser, but see, these are like metal ones.
Yeah.
So the metal ones are great because it does absolutely allow for the water to go through, and it's not too tiny. It's not like a mesh material so that the rest of the nutrients and stuff can't get through it, which is really nice. But that's kind of the major problem with tea bags, is that you're not going to get everything from that tea because some of those nutrients and some of those elements will be stuck in the mesh. So yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, I've definitely learned a lot from this podcast. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and speak with me. I'm going to do a little promo for you real quick. So if you're listening and you would like to learn more about Melissa's personal tea company, it's called redzentea. I will leave a link to her website in the show notes. And I will also leave a link to her Tea Sommelier and tea blending course that she teaches through the International Tea Masters Association. So if you would like to learn more about tea and you want to take one of those courses, the links will be in the show notes as well. So thank you so much, Melissa, for coming on here. I definitely learned a lot about brewing tea, and the next time, aka tomorrow morning when I brew tea, I will definitely keep those notes in mind.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.